Good morning, boys and girls, and thanks for joining with me as we learn something, hopefully not new, but sometimes it is new in our life, about our life in Jesus. And this morning I'm reading for you a book by Max Lucado called You Are Mine, and we're going to encounter the same character that we did last week, named, do you remember his name? Punchinello. Very good. Here we are. Punchinello lived in Wemmicksville. Just like other Wemmicks, he was made of wood. Just like the other Wemmicks, he was carved by Eli, the Wemmick maker. And just like the other Wemmicks, he sometimes did silly things. Like the time he began collecting boxes and balls. Things started getting crazy when a Wemmick named Tuck bought a brand new box. Others had boxes, but Tuck's was a brand new box. Tuck loved his new box. He thought it was the best box in the whole village. It was brightly colored and he was proud of it. Too proud, perhaps. He strutted up and down the street, showing off his box. "Have you seen my new box?" he would ask the Wemmicks that he passed on the street. "Would you like to touch my new box?" Tuck marched right up to Punchinello. "Don't you wish you had a new box?" he teased. Punchinello thought Tuck's box was beautiful, and he began to wish for a box of his own. Tuck kept showing off his box, thinking he was better than the other Wemmicks because he had a new box. Nip, another Wemmick, disagreed. "My box is just as good as Tuck's," he said, as he showed off his box to Wemmicks on the other side of the street. Nip's box was not new, but it was a bit bigger and a bit brighter and a bit more than Tuck could handle. Tuck got quiet and gave Nip a mad look. Then he had an idea. He stepped into a store and bought a ball. Now he had more things than Nip. He had a box and a ball. Nip frowned at Tuck's ball. Nip could do better than that. He bought 2 balls. And with a smile on his face, 2 balls in the box in his hands, he marched over to Tuck and smirked. "Now I have more than you." Before he knew it, Tuck was in the store buying another box. Then Nip ran to buy another ball. Then Tuck bought another ball and Nip bought another box. Ball, box, box, ball, box. Nip, Tuck, Tuck, Nip, Nip, Tuck. On and on it went. Someone could have stopped the whole silly mess right there. In fact, that's what the mayor tried to do. "You two are being silly," he said to Nip and Tuck. "Why, who cares who has the most toys?" "You're just jealous," they replied, "because you don't have any." "Jealous? Of you? Ha!" But within a few moments, the mayor was in that store buying an armful of boxes and balls. Other Wemmicks began to join in. The butcher, the baker, the cabinet maker, the doctor from up the street, the dentist from down the street. Before long, every Wemmick wanted to be the one with the most boxes and balls. Some boxes were big, some were bright, some balls were heavy and some were light. Tall people carried them, small people carried them. Everybody was carrying them. And everybody thought the same thought. Good Wemmicks have a lot. Not so good Wemmicks don't have much. When a Wemmick walked down the center of Wemmicksville with a stack of balls and boxes higher than his head, the people stopped. "Now there goes a good Wemmick," they would say. But when a Wemmick passed by with only 1 ball or 1 box, the others would shake their heads and think and even whisper out loud, "Oh dear, poor Wemmick. Poor, poor Wemmick." Of course, Punchinello didn't want to be called poor. So he decided to get as many boxes and balls as he could. He searched throughout his closet and found a little ball. He dug into his pocket, found enough money to buy 1 small box. "I know what I'll do," he said. "I'll sell my books to get more money, to buy more boxes and more balls." So he did. He bought a blue and green box with clouds painted on the sides. He still wanted more. "I'll work nights to get extra money," he told himself, and so he did. He bought another ball. Since he was working nights, he didn't need his bed, so he decided, "I'm going to sell my bed." And he sold his bed, bought 2 more balls. Soon Punchinello had an armful, but other Wemmicks had even more. Some of them had so many boxes and balls they actually had trouble walking. "It's hard keeping up with all my balls and boxes," they would say, acting like they were complaining when in fact they were really bragging. Punchinello wanted to be like those Wemmicks, so he sold more stuff and he worked more hours. His eyes were getting tired from not getting any sleep. His arms were tired from carrying all those boxes and balls. He couldn't remember the last time he sat down to rest. And worst of all, his friends couldn't remember when Punchinello last came to play. "We haven't seen you in a long time," his friend Lucia said to him one day. "Why don't you come and play again?" asked his buddy Splint. Not everyone cared about boxes and balls. Punchinello's friends didn't, but Punchinello cared more about having boxes and balls than he cared about having his friends. "I've got work to do," he would tell them, and his friends would sigh. Punchinello didn't care. He only cared what the other box and ball people thought, and no matter what he did, he couldn't buy enough things to get their attention. Finally, he had an idea. "I know, I'll sell my house," he decided. "That's crazy," his friend Lucia said. "Where then will you live?" asked his other friend Splint. Punchinello didn't know, but he didn't care. All he could think about was all the boxes and balls he would have with all the money he got from selling his house. So he sold his house. He bought boxes and more boxes and balls and more balls. He carried so many of them he couldn't see where he was going. His stack went way above his head. But he didn't mind. So what if his arms ached? So what if he kept walking into walls? So what if he had no friends? He had boxes and balls. And when he passed Wemmicks, they would turn and say, "Wow, he must be a really good Wemmick." Punchinello heard them. He couldn't see them, but he heard them, and he felt good. He thought to himself, now I'm a good Wemmick. But then somebody changed the rules. It was the mayor's wife. She was very proud of her boxes and balls. She not only had a lot of them, but she had special kinds of them too. She bought them at the fanciest stores with funny names and left the names on the boxes so everyone would see them. She wanted to be the best Wemmick. One day she had an idea. "Not only will I have the most, but I will go the highest." So she climbed on top of one of her boxes and shouted, "Look at me, everybody!" And immediately all the box and ball people tried to outdo her. One climbed on a fountain, another on a balcony, another onto a roof. It was the mayor who spotted the mountain, of course. Behind the village of the Wemmicks was a mountain called Wemmick's Peak. "I'm going to the top of the mountain," he shouted, hoping to get there first. And the race was on to see which Wemmick would have the most and climb the highest. So the Wemmicks loaded their boxes and balls and began running up the mountain. It was a crazy, crazy race. Since the wooden people couldn't see where they were going, they kept bumping into each other. Since they were exhausted, they fell over their own feet. Since the trail was so narrow, some fell down the side of it, but still they kept going. And bringing up the rear was Punchinello. He was having a hard climb, harder than the rest. After all, he'd only been a good Wemmick for a short period of time. He wasn't used to carrying so many boxes and balls, but he was determined. He kept putting one little wooden foot ahead of the other, but since he couldn't see, he didn't know he was on the side of the trail, and since he couldn't see, he didn't know he'd left the trail. All he knew was that all of a sudden, he was somehow alone. "Oh," he thought, "I must be ahead of everyone else." So he kept climbing up and up and up. "I must be very near the top. I am such a good Wemmick. I'll be the highest with the most." About that time, Punchinello's foot caught on the edge of something. He tried to keep his balance. His toys swayed to the right and then to the left. He leaned back and then forward, but he couldn't stop. He was going to fall. He didn't know, however, that he in fact had walked up the trail to Eli's house. He tripped on the step of the porch, tumbled through the front door of Eli's workshop. And when Punchinello realized where he was a little bit embarrassed. For a long time, He stayed there, lying face down on the floor, surrounded by all his boxes and balls. One of the balls rolled across the floor and stopped at Eli's workbench, and that's when the woodcarver turned around. Punchinello. Eli's voice was calm and deep and kind. The Wemmick still didn't move. He could feel his wooden face turning red. Looks like you've been carrying a great load. The weary Wemmick climbed to his knees but kept his head low. These are my boxes and my balls, Wemmick said quietly. Do you play with them? Asked Eli. Punchinello shook his head. Do you like balls and boxes? Well, I like the way they make me feel. How do they make you feel? Eli asked. Important, Punchinello answered with a bit of a small voice. Eli observed. So you've been thinking like almost all the other Wemmicks. You've been thinking that the more you have, the better you are and the happier you'll be. I suppose so. Come here, Punchinello. I want to show you something. Punchinello lifted his wooden head and looked at Eli for the first time. He was relieved to see that the Wemmick maker wasn't angry. So Punchinello followed Eli over to the window. Look at them, Eli said. Punchinello looked out the window at the swarm of Wemmicks still climbing the mountain. They were tumbling and stumbling, fighting each other, even elbowing each other to get ahead. Eli asked, do they look happy? Punchinello shook his head. Do they look important? Eli asked. Not at all, Punchinello said, noticing the mare and his wife. The mare was on the ground and she was stepping on his back. She had a box on her head and he had a ball in his mouth. Eli asked, do you think I created Wemmicks to behave this way? No, said Punchinello. And then Punchinello felt a big hand on his shoulder. Do you know how much your boxes and balls have cost you? All my books, my bed, my money, my house. My little friend, they cost you much more than that. So Punchinello was trying to remember what else he'd sold when Eli continued. They cost you happiness. You haven't been happy, have you? Punchinello paused and thought about it and said, no. They cost you friends. And most of all, they cost you trust. You didn't trust me to make you happy. You trusted these boxes and balls. Punchinello looked at the pile of toys, and all of a sudden they didn't seem so valuable anymore. I guess I kind of messed up, Punchinello said. That's okay, Eli replied. You're still special. Punchinello ducked his head and smiled. You're special, Eli said, not because of what you have. You're special because of who you are. You are mine. I love you. Don't forget that, little friend. I won't, Punchinello smiled, and then he paused and asked, Eli? Yes? What should I do with all these boxes and balls? Perhaps you should give them to someone who really needs them. Punchinello turned to leave and stopped and asked again, Eli? Yes? I don't have a place to sleep. Eli smiled and offered, would you like to sleep here tonight? Oh, I sure would. I am so tired. So that night, Punchinello slept on a bed of wood shavings. He slept really well, and it felt really good to be close to his maker. Thanks for joining with me today.